Hello and welcome everybody to ICMDA webinars. I'm Dr. Peter Saunders, the Chief Executive of the International Christian Medical and Dental Association. And today on ICMDA webinars, we've got our dear friend, Dr. Jay Smith, back again for the fourth of his series on understanding Islam, the Quranic manuscripts. We have just in the last week come back from the ICMDA World Congress in Tanzania, where we had over 1,000 doctors and dentists from over 100 countries present. And we now represent 107 national movements with 23 new ones joining us. So we really thank God for that. So it's my delight again to introduce Dr. Jay Smith in the fourth and final talk of his series on understanding Islam. We've done the hermeneutical key, we've done Mecca, we've done Muhammad, and this week we'll be focusing on the Quranic manuscripts themselves. And Muslim tradition teaches that the Quran we use today originated with Muhammad, was finally canonized by Uthman in 652 AD, and that not one word nor one letter has changed in the last 1400 years. But what do the Quranic manuscripts actually reveal? That's our question. This webinar is going to evaluate the various Quranic manuscripts in existence today, comparing their texts and ages, and identifying their possible literary sources. Dr. Jay Smith has worked with Muslims since 1983. He has 2 master's degrees and completed his PhD in Islamics in the areas of apologetics and polemics in 2017. Jay is one of Christianity's principal public evangelists and debaters to the Muslim world. He travels extensively, teaching apologetics for those exploring ministry to Muslims, and engages the movers and thinkers of Islam on a weekly basis. He's the founding member of the Hyde Park Christian Fellowship, a weekly evangelism ministry to Muslims in London's public places, as well as a co-founder for the Pfander Centre for Apologetics. Jay, it's a pleasure to have you back here again. We really look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, well, welcome back, all of you, from your great conference in Tanzania, and we're now going to get right into it. I have an awful lot to go through, so I'm going to go lickety-split. Just put your pens down. You're not going to keep up with me. We do have the PowerPoint that we will send you, and you can follow the PowerPoint if you want to see the recording later. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and let's start our talk for today. In search of a book. We looked at a search of the place. We looked at in search of the man. Now we're looking at in search of the book. And of course, that is the newest research that we're going to look at concerning the history of the Qur'an. So what do Muslims claim about the Quran? Well, they claim 4 things. The first thing they claim is that it's uncreated. It exists eternally on clay tablets. That's in chapter 85, 22 of the Quran. They claim that it was sent down to Muhammad between 610 and 632 AD. They claim that the Quran was completed by Uthman in 652, and that from that time, the last 1400 years, it has not been changed. So not one word, not one letter. So uncreated, sent down, completed, unchanged. Those are the 4 things every Muslim anywhere, except possibly the liberals, would claim. We would not make these claims. We know the Bible was created. It is written by man. We even put down the names of the authors for many of the books. Not sent down to anyone. It was inspired by God, but written down by men. It was complete in its original form, but we don't have the original form. We don't have any original manuscripts. We make that very clear. And the Bible has changed here and there in a few places, about 40 verses that we know of. And we say exactly where they are in Mark 16, chapter 9 through 20, John chapter 7, verse 53 to John chapter 8, verse 11, and especially 1 John chapter 5, verse 7. Those are verses we know about, and we warn the reader that those verses are not found in the earliest Greek manuscripts. So we do know that here and there have been some variants. What my remit there today is this. I'm not going to confront the notion of uncreated or sent down about the Quran, because why? I can't critique that because I'm Wow, how do you critique uncreated eternality? Set down, I wasn't there in the 7th century. But the last two claims they make, I am going to ask questions about. And that is, I'm going to critique complete and unchanged. Is or the Quran that we have a complete Quran? Was it from the very beginning? Has it changed? So this is my remit. I would like any Muslim, if there is Muslims, any Muslims listening, to provide me with one Quranic manuscript from the mid-century, that's 652, that is complete, that has 114 surahs, and that is unchanged. That this Quran that I have in my hand here is exactly like that manuscript, word for word, letter for letter, just like the manuscript that you're going to show me. That's all I'm asking. That's a pretty simple task. That shouldn't be very difficult if Muslims continue to claim that they have the Quran that goes right back to 652, complete and unchanged. Now, the 13 areas I'm going to investigate very quickly. What do modern Muslims claim? What did early Muslims say? The historical anachronism, source criticism. We're going to go into the compilation, how the Quran was put together, the diacritical variants, the 6 earliest Quranic manuscripts. We're going to look at the 2 sonata palimpsests, the 4 carbon dating lab reports, the 4,000 consonant variants, the 63 earliest extant fragments, the 1924 Huff's canonized text, the one we're using today, and the new Aramaic Proto-Quran research, that's just absolutely exciting, but more later. Let's get right into what do modern Muslims claim. Fethullah Gulen from Turkey, influential Turkish cult leader, says the Quran is unaltered, unedited, and untampered. Here you have Suzanne Hanif. She is a convert, well-known today on the internet. She says the Quran is preserved today in its exact original form. Here you have Abdul Yusuf Ali, the most authoritative translator for the Quran in the English language. He says not a single letter has changed. Maulvi Muhammad Ali, who comes from the Ahmadiyya movement, he said not even a diacritical point has changed. That means not even the dots above and below the letters have changed. Dr. Shabbat Ali, considered to be the world's leading debater on the Quran in the Muslim world today, he says exactly that the Quran is exactly identical for over 1,300 years. He goes on to say that Muslims have not quarreled over what is the text for 1,400 years. We find no difference from that copy to what we're reading today. And then I'm going to end with Dr. Yasser Qadi, the leading authority in the English-speaking world on the Quran, especially on the Qira'ats, and he says not one word, not a letter has changed in the Quran. So why do they make these claims? Well, they have to. They have no other choice. The Quran makes these claims. Eternality is right there in chapter 85, verse 21 to 22. As far as not one word, not letter, that's right there in chapter 10, verse 15. It's also repeated in chapter 18, verse 27. But the reason it cannot be changed is because Allah himself, in chapter 15, verse 9, it says Allah will guard it. He will keep it from being changed. Therefore, there's no way that any man can change one letter or one word. The Quran we have in our hand today is the eternal Quran, the one that was sent to Muhammad, the one that was compiled by Uthman, and the Quran that has not ever changed for 1,400 years. Conclusion, the Quran we have is not changed one iota since its inception. That Quran we have today is exactly the same as that which is on the preserved tablets in heaven. Every word, every letter is the same. That our Quran parallels, they would say in every detail, that which was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad was written down completely by Uthman and has never changed in 1,400 years. Now, that's a huge claim, and you can see all the Muslims are making that claim, bar none. They all make those claims. But is that what the earliest Muslim scholars believe? Let's take a look, and let's see what they used to say, at least in the 9th and 10th century, over 1,000 years ago. These are the ones that are the first to come up with their reference. Let's look here. Here you have Ibn Abi Dawud. Some verses, he admits, were lost. Here you have a Suyuti. He says, let none of you say, I have acquired the whole of the Quran. How does he know what all of it is when much of the Quran has disappeared? Rather, let him say, I have acquired what has survived. That's quite a mouthful. Sahih Muslim, the second of the most authoritative hadith compilers, said some verses were forgotten. Here you have Sahih al-Bukhari, who says some verses were canceled. He goes on and says that some verses were missing. Then you have Ibn Abi Dawud, who says some verses were overlooked. According to Muwatta ibn Malik, it says some verses were changed. Abi ibn Dawud, who is from the 19th century, says some verses were modified. And according to Sahih Bukhari, again from the 9th century, who died in 780, says that some verses were substituted. I'm sorry, 970, not 780, but 970. And then you have Sunan ibn Majah, who says that even some verses were eaten by sheep. Now, let's summarize that. Lost, disappeared, forgotten, canceled, missing, overlooked, changed, modified, substituted, eaten by sheep. Folks, does this sound like a book which was compiled perfectly and completely? Can you see? Certainly, the earliest compilers believed that there were intentional human intervention right through its initial compilation. So the modern scholars today are not following what the earliest scholars used to say. There seems to be a disconnect. When you look inside the Quran, you see there's lots of historical problems. I'm not going to go into them. This would take too much time. In chapter 20, verse 85 to 87, it talks about the Samaritan. Yet, hold on a minute. Samaritans did not exist at the time of Moses. This story is during the time of Moses. There you see the golden calf, and it was a Samaritan who built the golden calf. Samaritans were only created after the fall of the northern kingdom of Israel by Sargon II, the Assyrian king, in 722 BC. That's 700 years later. In chapter 17, verse 1, it says that whoever this prophet went to from the Masjid al-Haram to the Masjid al-Aqsa, that is in Jerusalem, according to what Muslims say today. The problem is there was no mosque in Jerusalem in 621 when this event supposedly took place. The Dome of the Rock that most people look at was built in 691. The Masjid al-Aqsa that most Muslims claim is where he went to was built in 710. And this event took place in 621. And they cannot talk about the Jewish temple of Jerusalem that he went to because that was destroyed in 70 AD, another historical anachronism. It mentions in chapter 34, verse 10 to 11, that David created some chain mail. Yet David lived in 1000 BC. Coats of chain mail were not invented in 200 BC. That's 800 years later, folks. You can see some problems here. The Quran attributes crucifixions to the time of Moses, where Pharaoh sends twice in chapter 7 and in chapter 20. He sends out the magicians to be crucified because they cannot keep up with Moses. In chapter 12, verse 41, the Pharaoh at the time of Joseph has the baker crucified. Now, Moses lived in 1400 BC. Joseph lived in 1800 BC. Crucifixions did not exist at all in Egypt. They didn't do crucifixions in Egypt. They were first introduced by the Phoenicians in 500 BC. Thus, the Quran's crucifixions are in the wrong place, over 1,000 to 1,300 years too early. And the one crucifixion they should have got right, the one of Jesus Christ, in chapter 4, verse 157, they completely deny and say it never happened, that he never was crucified. Yet when you look at the historical record, look at Thales, a Greek, and Phlegon, both Greeks, they were debating the crucifixion in 52 AD. That's within 20 years of Christ's death. Lucian, the Greek satirist, talked about it in the 2nd century. Mara Barsarapian's letter to Pagan refers to it in the 73 AD. Josephus, a Jewish historian, writes about it the end of the 1st century and refers to it. And Tacitus, who hated Christians, he was a Roman historian, not only mentioned it, but mentioned it happened during the time of Pontius Pilate under the authority of Tiberius. That's why we know it happened in 33 AD. That's the historical record. This chapter 4, verse 157 of the Quran doesn't even get to be written down till the 8th century. That's 700 years too late. It's also got the wrong Mary. In chapter 19, it says that she is a sister of Aaron, yet she is the mother of Jesus. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is a sister of Aaron. In chapter 66, she is the daughter of Imran, who is Amram in our Bible. And in Surah 20, verse 30, that Aaron is the brother of Moses. Now, hold on a minute. We do know that Moses and Aaron did have a sister. Her name was Miriam. The three of them were all children of Amram. It looks like they've got the Miriam of the Old Testament mixed up with mother of Jesus. There's 1,400 years between them. Obviously, this is a historical anachronism. It confuses the Qibla in chapter 2. It mentions that the Qibla was changed from the farthest mosque down to the Great Mosque. That would be Mustafa al-Haram, which would be today, that would be Mecca. The difficulty is, look at all the mosques. Up until all the mosques that have been found from the 7th century up until the 8th century, up until 706, are facing Petra. None are facing Mecca. They don't begin to face Mecca until 727. That is the 8th century. That's 100 years after the Quran. The Qibla was supposedly canonized. It confuses the Kaaba in chapter 5, 2, 3, 14, and 22. It mentions that Abraham rebuilt the Kaaba there. What was Abraham doing in Mecca? I don't know. But we do know that there is no reference. We've just got a new inscription that now says that this Mustafa al-Haram, this where the Kaaba is situated, was actually created in 697, the late 7th century. It confuses Pharaoh in the Tower of Babel and Haman, mentioning that Pharaoh talks about Haman and it says that he is to kindle for me a large tower. Now, Haman, first of all, is not an Egyptian name. It's an Assyrian name. What's more, the Egyptians did not build towers. They built pyramids. Pharaoh lived in 1500 BC. Haman in the Bible lived in 510 BC. They never met each other. There was 1,000 years between them. So you can see another historical anachronism. It says that Alexander the Great was an amazing engineer, built a sheet of iron, a wall between two mountains made out of iron and copper. Hold on a minute. Alexander Great making that large a wall in 330 BC? There's no record of such a wall in his 3 biographies written about him, and such a feat would be one of the most great, amazing engineering feats of all time. And it gets the coins mixed up. In chapter 12, verse 20, it says that Joseph is sold for a few dirham counted out. That means coins in the time of Joseph. Joseph lived in 1800 BC. Coins were not created until 600 BC by the Lydians. The dirham was only introduced in 661 by the Sufyani family. So obviously this was not a coin, a dirham at the time of Muhammad. That's why I don't go to the Quran to find out my history. If you want to find the same story in the Bible, in Genesis 37, verse 28, it mentions that Joseph was sold for 20 shekels. That is 0.2% of a kilo of silver. That's the right percentage. That's the right coinage. It's not coin. This is a weighted measure, and that's exactly what a slave costs, according to the Nuzi tablets that are found in Iraq from that time. Now let's go and ask, how is it that the Quran was put together? Well, we do know that it borrowed many stories. According to Islam, it has always existed. Therefore, it would not borrow anything. If anything, it would be the original of all the other stories. Yet when we look at the Quran, look at the story of Cain and Abel from Surah 5, verse 31 and 32. That comes from the Targum of Jonathan ben Uzziah and the Mishnah Sanhedrin, written in the 2nd and 5th century. The story of Solomon and Sheba in chapter 27. That comes from the 2nd Targum of Esther. The story of Jesus and the palm tree in chapter 19, lost books of the Bible. And I could go on and on. There is so much of the Quran that is borrowed from Jewish sources, from Christian sectarian writings, apocryphal writings. We find it from Ethiopic writings. We find it from Zoroastrian writings. We are now amalgamating and putting together and finding exactly where these stories are. More about that later in this lecture. Let's go and talk about the compilations itself. Now, this is what the traditions tell us. This is not me. Sahih Bukhari is the one that's going to give you what they say. And what Sahih Bukhari says is that Muhammad died in 632. The Quran was compiled in 652, but Al-Bukhari is writing about its compilation in 870. Folks, that's 240 years late. Everything we know about how the Quran was put together was not written down while Muhammad was living, was not written down while the Quran should have been written down. It was all the story redacted back 240 years later. That's the problem. And here's the story right here. Here's Sahih Bukhari. I'm not going to read it. It's too long. It'll take me too much time. When you get the PowerPoint, read it yourself. This is volume number 6, hadith number 509. Basically, this is the first compilation. According to these writings here, when Umar, Abu Bakr was caliph in 632, between 632 and 634. There was a battle in Yamama. There were people that had memorized the Quran. They died in the battle. their memory went with them. So immediately they got Zayd ibn Thabit to write the Quran in its original form. He refuses to do it. They said, you must do it. You are the secretary of Muhammad. You need to write it. He writes it down. That's the first compilation. It was given to Abu Bakr, who gave it to Umar, who gave it to his daughter named Hafsa, who had been a wife of Muhammad, and she put it under her bed. She left it under her bed for 20 years. Let's turn the page. The next hadith, 510, also volume 6. Now, in this, there's another battle. Now we're at the time of Uthman, 20 years later. There's a battle way up in Azerbaijan, and the Muslims that are there, they come from Syria, from Iraq, and also from Medina. And they go to they'll go to a mosque and pray. And as they're praying, those in Medina hear different prayers from different recitations of the Quran, and they start fighting. They go to blows. And then they come down, Udayma comes down all the way down to Medina, and he goes to Uthman. He says, we've got to do something. We must not have different Qurans. Let's rewrite it. So they take Zayd ibn Thabit's copy that was from Hafsa. They take it out, and he rewrites it in the Qurayshi dialect. And then that is sent to 5 cities, and all the other manuscripts, everything else that disagreed with it, were then burnt. They were burnt so that there would not be any deformed or corrupted copies. So that happens according to these traditions here in 652 AD. Now, here's some questions. Why did God choose a language which could not accommodate the Quran? You can see as we get into it, there were no dots and vowels when the Quran, the Arabic that was used in the Quran was first used. We'll talk more about that. Why did God choose a man who could not read and write? Why in the world did he give his revelation to an illiterate man? If it was the most important revelation in the history of mankind? Why did Muhammad not learn to read and write? He had 22 years. It only took me 2 weeks to learn how to read Arabic, and I don't know Arabic. He knew Arabic, so he could certainly have read it if he just studied it in 2 weeks. And why did his secretary, who did know how to read and write, why didn't he write this down? Why didn't Abu Bakr make copies immediately in 634 and send them to the provinces? Muslims say 1,000 died in Yamama and battled in 632. Well, actually, according to the traditions, only 70 died, which proves that memorization is not good enough. If 70 dead creates a crisis, so much so they have to write it down, then memorization is not good enough, though Muslims like to claim such. How could there be dialectical differences in the mid-7th century? I don't want to get into this. A huge problem. We're going to talk about it a little later. And why did Uthman burn all the other copies if they were perfect? Well, let's go back one. And then Muslims claim they were burned because of differing dialects. Absolutely not. If you know Arabic, you cannot have dialectical differences in a written text without vowelization. The Dhamma, the Kasra, and the Fatha. There were no vowels in the 7th century, so this was not for dialectical differences. The fact that Zayd ibn Thabit came upon Surah 33, according to that tradition, shows that it was still not even complete there in the time of both 632 and 652. If there was a second Quran in 652, why are there now so many different Arabic Qurans? We'll get to that. And if 5 to 9 copies were made for each province, where are they today? Show me even one. Now, according to what the Muslims tell us, this is their tradition, this is their story, not my story. This is what happened. Muhammad dies in 632. Uthman makes the final Quran, the final compilation in 652. That was sent to 5 cities: Mecca, Medina, Basra, Kufa, and Damascus. They're all there. There's the 5 circles, 5 cities, 2 in Arabia, 2 in what is today Iraq, and 1 in what is today Syria. Now, they were sent so that there would be no more other Qurans, that there would be now a standard Quran. But here's the problem. A Quran suddenly appears in Damascus, written by Ubay ibn Ka'b, who is a companion of the Prophet. It has 116 surahs, according to the traditions. That's 2 more than what are in the Quran today. Ibn Masud in Basra, or just south of Baghdad, he creates a Quran, writes another Quran in the late 7th century, and it only has 110 surahs. That's 6 surahs less than the Quran we have today. Ibn Musa creates another Quran in Basra. That's the other red circle. It has 114, but it has thousands of manuscript variants. So there were at least 5 Qurans in the 7th century from Mecca, Medina, Basra, Kufa, Damascus. We don't even have one of them today. Not one of those 5. But something happens between the 7th and 8th century, and this is where the qira'ats begin to be introduced. So the Quran's beginning. According to Muhammad, we begin with 1 Quran. Jibril had 7 readings, according to what Muslims tell us. But then we go to 7 Qurans because They needed different dialects. This is what the Muslim traditions tell us. Uthman's Qurayshi Quran in 652 then puts it right back to one Quran sent to 5 cities. So where did the 30 Qira'at Qurans come from if there's only one Quran at the time of Uthman in 652? Why has it become such an issue today? Well, let's look and see. These are the diacritical variants that we introduced in 2016. The woman that you see in the bottom picture with the glasses on, that's Hatun Tosh. She is an amazing woman. She is my colleague. And back in 2013, she was down in North Africa, went into a bookstore to find an Arabic Quran. The man behind the counter said, well, which Quran are you talking about? She said, well, there's only one Arabic Quran. He says, no, I have Hafsir, I have Warsh, I have Kalun, I have Kisai, I have Ibn Kathir. She said, okay, give me all. So she bought all of them, brought them back to London, showed them to me. I started laughing because I didn't know that these still existed. These are known as qira'ats, means readings, different readings of the Quran. These are Arabic Qurans. These are not translations. These are Arabic Qurans. She said, are they different? I said, yes, there are hundreds. There are thousands of differences. But I thought these had all been thrown into the Nile River back in 1924 when they canonized it down to one text. So she said, well, how many are there? I said, well, there will be about 30 of them. So she decided to go out and look for them. And so she went, she had people go to Jordan, to Morocco, and to Yemen, to Sana'a, and to go into bookstores. And she came up by 2016, she had 26 different Qurans. We took them down to Speaker's Corner. If you go on Pfander Films, you'll see us holding them up. The Muslims had a furore. They did not know what to do with this. Look at the picture on the right. See the tall man there with the beard? That is Muhammad Hijab, one of the leading authorities on the internet. He has a following of 500,000. He was in the crowd that day who knew that we were going to be there. He did not know what we were going to do. And when we held them up, he got outside of the crowd and he said, all the Muslims, leave. Do not look at what they're showing you. Do not listen to what they're saying. I will explain it to you. So he decided he would explain it to him. This is in June of 2016. So what are we talking about? Well, the Arabic which is used in the Quran today does not come from the Hijaz, but from much further north, from Nabatea. The Arabic was Nabatean Aramaic. Today's current Arabic has 28 letters. 7th century Nabatean Arabic only had 14 to 16 consonantal letters, or what they know as rasms. Obviously, this caused a problem in understanding what was being written. A single consonant letter could be pronounced 5 to 8 different ways, depending on where you put the dots and vowels. Thus, in the 8th century, dots, which are known as ijams, and vowels, haraka, were added to the script to help Muslims read the text. Here is a manuscript. This is a normal manuscript. On the left is the Samarkand manuscript, and on the right is the Sana'a manuscript. These are 2 of the 6 earliest manuscripts. You notice there's no dots above or below them. There's no vowels, no slash, which would be the kafa, fata, which would be the ah sound. No little curly Q above the line, which would be a dhamma, which would be the u sound, and no slash below the letter, which would be a kasra, which would be the e. There's no fatha, dhamma, or kasra, a, u, or e on any of these manuscripts. They're just consonantal texts. That's they are, just consonantal scripts. So today, of the 28 letters that exist in the Quran, in the Arabic today, 6 of them don't need these dots. The aleph doesn't need a dot. The kaf doesn't need a dot, or the lam, or the mim, or the ha, or the wow. Those 6 don't need dots. The other 22 now need dots. That's today's Arabic. That's why many Muslims do not understand this argument, because they think that this is the same Arabic back then as it is today. No, don't take off all those dots, and that's what Arabic would have been like in the 7th century. How is that important? Well, just look at one letter. This is a normal letter, a smiley face. You put 1 dot above it, you get the N letter. You put 2 dots above it, you get the T letter, ta. You get 3 dots above it, you get the TH, tha. You put 1 dot below it by itself, it's the ba, and 2 dots is the ya. So na, ta, tha, ba, ya. You can get 5 different letters by putting those dots. Those dots did not exist in the 7th century. So you can see why you can get 5 different letters now. That means if those dots aren't there, you can pretty much put dots where you want to. Neither did the vowels. This is where you get your dialectical differences. To get different dialects, you need to use these 3 vowels, either short or long, the dhamma, the kasra, or the fatha. Now, as a result, when you put these together in words, take a look here. Here are 19 different words just with different dots all the same letters, except I put the dots in a different place, and I put the dhamma, fatha, and katha in different places. You can get 19 different words just with 3. Can you imagine what you have if you have a whole sentence of these, or a whole surah of these? So let's look at the 50, the 30. Now, this is what happened. I got from the Wikipedia, but I put dates to it. This is what Muslims don't want me to do. At the very beginning, there were 7 that were chosen. Once you put dots, and then everybody decided to put their dots where they wanted to, and there is no official person to do that. So in 5 different cities, in Medina, in Mecca, in Basra, Damascus, and in Kufa, those 5 cities, you had different men putting their dots where they wanted to, and each one put their name to their dots. So Nafi was in Medina, Ibn Kathir was in Mecca, Abu Amr was in Basra, Ibn Amir was in Damascus, Asa was in Kufa, Hamza was in Kufa, and Al-Kisai was in Kufa. But hold on. Look at the dates. Look at the death dates. Look when they died. 785, 738, 770, 736, 745, 772, 805. Not one of these men knew Muhammad. So how did they know where to put their dots? Not one of these 7 men lived in the same century that Muhammad. And 5 of them didn't even live in the same area. They lived in Iraq and Syria. So this is 100 years later or more, because you go up to the 9th century here. These are men that never knew Muhammad. Who chose them? This guy chose them, Ibn Mujahid. He chose them in the 10th century. This is 300 years later. You get 7 different Qurans that were considered to be official. These are known as the readers, or the qira'ats, or some call them the ahruf. But that is not the Quran that I have in my hand today. None of those 7 are here. This Quran, the official Quran, this is the Quran that every Muslim uses today. Well, 93% of all Muslims today use. This is the Hafs Quran. Do you see Hafs' name there? His name is not there for a very good reason. He was chosen in the 12th century. In 1194, this man here, Al-Shatibi, that's 500 years after Muhammad, decided to add another 2 for each one of the readers. He added 2 disciples, transmitters. So now 7 times 2, you get 14. Do you see Hafs' name there? He is from Asim. He is from Kufa. He died in 796. He died in the late 8th century. He never knew Muhammad. Yet this is the Quran that has been chosen. Hold on a minute. That now makes 21 different Qurans, 21 different sets of dots and vowels. 21 different sets of different ways of reading it. But that still wasn't good enough. In the 15th century, in 1429 is when he died, a guy named Al-Jazari chose another 3 readers with 2 students from every one of the 3 readers. That made another 9. So now we have 7 plus 14 plus 9. We now have 30 different Qurans by the 15th century. That's 800 years after Muhammad. These are the official 30. Chosen from how many? From roughly 700 Qurans. 700 different Qurans. So you may say, well, aren't they all the same? Why would you put your name to them if they were all the same? Why would you even have a different Quran to be memorized if they were all the same? We decided to do and ask this question. How different are these Qurans? You want to see how? If you look at Hafs, I've just circled his name. He is the official one that is being used today because he was chosen in 1985 to do so. When you compare him against all the other 29, there are 93,263 differences. Let me repeat that. 93,263 differences. That means 93,000 words, which means 93,000 different meanings, which means 93,000 different theologies, different doctrines, and different practices. Can you see how devastating this is? No wonder this caused such a furor all over the Muslim world. Here is just the 26 that we put up. You can see the different names. These are the 26 that Hatun found in 2016. That was in 2016. She now has found all 30 of them, and she's found 7 more because between 1924 and 1936, another 7 were then added by the Egyptian government. But let's just look at these 26 that she held up. Here you have Dr. Perny Powers from Australia. He has 23. His team is doing an amazing job looking at all the manuscript variants. Here is Hatun's complete collection of 37 Qurans, 37 different Qurans. Now let's look at some of the variants. You might say, oh, they're not that different. That's what Muslims will try to tell you. Here on the left, you have chapter 3, verse 146. It says katala. You notice if you look at where the green is underlined, you see the fata, fata, fata after katala, and you notice That means fought. Look on the right in Warsh, which is the second most popular Quran today. Instead of a fatha, you have a dama, and then you have a kasra, and then you have a fatha. So it's kutila. You see the little curly Q above the ka, and then you see the kasra among the ta, and then you see the fatha above the lam. That changes the word from fought to were killed. So did the prophets simply fight according to Hafs, or were they killed according to Warsh? If I were a prophet, I would rather fight than be killed, as the former survives, according to Hafs. That changes the story. Here on the left in chapter 43, verse 19, I could go to 93,000 of these. I'm just going to show you 4 as an example. On the left, you see slaves, ibadu. So you have a kasra, and then you have a fatha, and then you have a dama, making it ibadu there in that on the Hafs. On the Rao, it is now a kasra, and they've taken off the fatha, and they've taken off the dagar alaf, and they, instead of the dama, they've changed it to a fatha. So now it's inda. Instead, on the left, Hafs has slaves, and they make the angels who are slaves of the beneficent females. On the right now, it says, and they make the angels who are in the presence of the beneficent. Now, are the angels slaves of Allah, or simply in the presence of Allah? Is it the slaves or those in the presence who are made females? Now, if I were an angel, I would prefer being in God's presence rather than his slave. And if I were an angel, I would prefer if only the slaves were made females, thank you, not myself, because I'm a male. So you can see that has lots of problems. Here you have ihsanan on the left for Hafs, and you have in al-Duri, you have husnan. One is doing good and the other is beauty. So, and we have enjoined on man doing good to his parents, or according to al-Duri, and we have enjoined on men beauty to his parents. Are men supposed to do good or be beautiful to their parents? Well, I'm a parent. I have 3 sons. I would prefer my sons be good rather than be good looking. So here you have, and this is one of the most damaging ones, chapter 98, verse 6. Al-Bari'ati just changed to Al-Bari'ati with a glottal stop. Isn't that interesting? Just by changing a few vowels here, notice what happens. Indeed, they were disbelieved among the people of the scriptures, and polytheists will be the fire of hell, abiding eternally therein. Those are the worst of creatures, has now been changed to those are the worst of the innocent. This is talking about us as Christians. Are we the worst of creatures according to Hafs, or are we innocent? That's a huge difference. I like to know as a Christian. And what in the world are innocent Christians, Jews, and polytheists doing in hell, according to Warsh? So according to Hafs. I'd rather go with Warsh on this one. So you can see this has theological differences, this has doctrinal differences, and as far as for us as Christians, it has practical differences. So enormous amount of changes, so much so that there's the man on the left there. Notice that's Muhammad Hijab. He was there watching us hold up these qira'ats there in 2016. 4 years later, in June 8th, he decided to go to the man on the right. That is Dr. Yasir Qadhi. Dr. Yasir Qadhi is the world's leading authority in the Quran, did his doctoral thesis at Yale University in 1995 on this very problem. So who better to ask? How do we solve this problem? So he has a Zoom call, and I'm there watching it, so are others. We're watching it live. And it was for about 28 minutes. And the first question he asked, there's Muhammad Hijab in London, Yasir Qadhi, who lives in Houston, Texas, He is answering the call. And the first thing that Muhammad Hijab does is he holds out his hand and he points to his palm. And he says, I'm giving you a clear sheet of paper. Which qira'at? Which one? The Hafs, the Warsh, the Kilu? Which is the one that's eternal? Which is the one that was revealed to Muhammad? Which is the one that Uthman wrote? Before he could finish, Yasir Qadhi said, do not ask me this question. We do not talk about this in public. Turn off the camera. Come afterwards, after this interview, and we'll have a deep dive, and I'll explain it to you. And Muhammad Hijab said, this should be easy. Which one? Yasir Qadhi said, this is the most difficult question for the last 1,000 years for scholars. And he says, we in Islam, we have a respect for the Quran. We put a red line, and we don't go beyond that red line. We don't ask certain questions of the Quran. But when I was at Yale University, there are no red lines. You can ask any questions at Yale University. So Muhammad Hijab said, is this where you had your crisis of faith? He said, no, Yasir Qadhi said, no, not my crisis of faith, crisis of knowledge. He says, the Western scholars have come leaps and bounds in the last 100 years. And they're looking at us Muslims like the emperor with no clothes. And then he turns to Muhammad Hijab, and he says, you in the East, interesting, isn't it? You in the East, he's in London, yet that's the East. Your standard narrative has holes in it. Ooh, and that's where he coined the phrase. The standard, what narrative? The standard Islamic narrative. S-I-N. Are you getting it? The standard Islamic narrative has holes in it. Ooh, I love that. That's what it was all coined on June 8, 2020. He still wasn't answering the question. So finally, at the end of 28 minutes, after Yasser Qadhi says, I've never lectured on this, I never will lecture on this, you'll never see me talk about this in public, Muhammad Hijab said, okay, well then tell me which Quran. Tell me which Quran is the eternal Quran. Which one of these? And after being pushed for 28 minutes, Dr. Qadhi finally admitted, they are all the Quran. You take a little bit of Hafs, you take a little bit of what, you take a little Khalud, you take a little bit of Kasai, and you stir them up, and what you get is the Quran today. I started clapping. I was watching this live, and I immediately recorded this and put it on my computer. Because here he was admitting to the whole world, the world's leading authority on the Quran, that there was not just one Quran. There were 30 different Qurans, all amalgamated into what we have today. Oh, I loved it. Oh, that was fun. What he didn't know, because we know that and he doesn't, there are 93,236 differences between the other 29 and just us. Can you imagine what he has admitted? By that time, that was June 8th. Within 2 weeks, they put this interview up on both of their YouTube sites. Within 2 weeks, they had to stop the comments because so many hundreds of Muslims were commenting and saying, because of what that interview, I am no longer a Muslim. I have left Islam. You are the ones that said not one word, not letter has been changed. And now you admitted that there are thousands of differences. And my blood will be on your shoulder. Within 2 weeks, they had to shut down all the comments. Within 2 months, by August of 2020, they had to delete that interview from both their sites. That's how damaging that interview was. Folks, he was just being honest. Can you see how damaging this does to the Quran? Now, what about the manuscripts? Because this is even more damaging. Let's go back to those are the dots and vowels that were put on in the 8th, 9th, and 10th century. What about the early 8th century? What about the original text that the dots were added to? Here is the original text. These are the manuscripts, and there's 6 of them. And this is what I debated in 2014 with Dr. Shabir Ali. That debate, called the Classic Debate, you can watch it. It's only 2 hours long. Over 1 million people have watched it. I know of at least 100 people that have given their life to the Lord because of that one debate. And all I did was show these different manuscripts. The one on the left is the Topkapı manuscript. That is in Turkey. That is considered to be the best of all the manuscripts. I've got that manuscript in my library, in my office. And if you look at that manuscript, it's written in the Kufic text. It has a few dots in red that were added at a later date. But that manuscript is about 99% of the Quran. It disagrees with the Quran I have in my hand today in 2,270 different places. 2,270 different manuscript variants. It was written in the mid-8th century. This is 100 years after Muhammad. The one on the left is, on the right, is the Samarkand. That is from Tashkent in Uzbekistan. It only goes up to Surah 43. Half the Quran is missing. It has so many manuscript variants. It has so many grammatical mistakes and that it is considered an embarrassment by Muslim scholars today. Don't use it because it is written by amateurs. We go then to the Ma'il manuscript, which is in London, my favorite manuscript, because it's right there in London where I lived for 25 years. It is a Ma'il script. That means it's in a slanted script. It also only has, the Samarkand. Let's go back. The Samarkand is dated to the mid-8th century. We go to the Ma'il. It's dated to the late 8th century. Notice not 7th century, 8th century, around 790. And it has a slanted text. It only goes up to Surah 43. It is full of manuscript variants. The Petropolitanus in Paris, in the Bibliothèque Nationale there in Paris, it is only about 19%. There is a fragment that's about 23%. It has 93 different manuscript variants just within that 19%. And it is dated to about 720, so of the beginning of the 7th century. The Husseini manuscript, which is the one on the left, is in Cairo. It is a monumental text. If you look at it, you will see it is probably from the 9th century, not even the 8th century. It is coverings. You can see some of the coverings right on that page. It is hundreds and thousands of these coverings. Take a look. If you look at it, these coverings are covering words, they're covering phrases, they are sanitizing the text, they're censoring the text, and of what they don't cover, what is left behind, it now corresponds with the Huff's text that we use today. That's why it is such a problematic text. The one on the right is by far the most exciting. This is the Sana'a manuscript that was discovered in 1975 in the Sana'a mosque and the dome. If you look on the right side, you will see above the yellow line is Surah 19, and below that yellow mark is Surah 22. What happened to Surah 20 and 21? Well, they're on the left side. They start on the left side. But you notice there are two different scripts between the right page and the left page. There's about 60 years between those two texts. On the right side is what we know as is dated to around 705. That's the 8th century beginning. This is the oldest manuscript that exists in the world today. On the left side is about 60 years later. This is not a picture of the original. This is a facsimile of Dr. Garrett Prince, and he showed me it when I went to visit him. This is his photocopy of the manuscript. And he says, look at all those orange marks. Every time you see an orange mark, that is a manuscript variant. There's over 1,000 manuscript variants between this text and the text we use today. What's most exciting, underneath is another text. This is called a palimpsest. Now, it's not in this picture here, but they've now been able to separate the lower text from this upper text, and there are 63 verses in that lower text that do not correspond with the 705 text above it. When they look at the 63 verses, there are 70 manuscript variants between just the two layers. The lower layer was probably the later part of the 7th century. The upper layer is 705. So between 690 and 705, there are 70 different changes in the Quranic text. These are just 63 verses out of 6,000 that exist in the Quran today. So what are a summary? When you look at these 6 earliest Quranic manuscripts, not one of them is from the 7th century. Not one of them are complete. None of them completely agree with each other. None of them completely agree with the current 1924 Huff's text. All of them have hundreds and even thousands of subsequent manuscript variants. So when was the Quran completed? Well, before we do that, let's just look at this Sana'a. There is the two texts. Let me just so you see it there. You can see the under text and the upper text. That is what was discovered in 1975. Now, 63 verses, 70 variants, verbs are missing, prepositions, isolated lessons are different, entire sentence 16 times don't make the sense. This is not a school text, as Asma Hilali. This is a nascent Quran that has been washed off and rewritten over top with the changes that have been made in 705. That's exactly what's going on there. Now, let's go to the carbon datings, because the carbon datings are what Muslims like to point out to show you that the Quran is from the 7th century. They sent a piece of the Sana'a manuscript that we just looked at to 4 different laboratories in Europe, one to Lyon in France, and they dated a portion, the same portion to all 4 laboratories, and they dated the one page using carbon dating 14, and that one dated between 380 up to 550. They sent another one to Kiel in Germany, and they dated in their carbon dating from about 410 up to 460 AD. Then they sent another one to the Zurich in Switzerland, and that dated it from about 460 up to 550. And the last one they sent to Oxford in England, and they dated that fragment from about 500 to 550. Now, note, these were all dated between 390 to 550. You notice, look at Muhammad's life. There's Muhammad's life. I've just circled it in the blue there. He lived between 570 and 632. So these are 80 to 220 years too early for his life. But when the Quran was finally compiled, the Uthmanic recension, there I've just circled it, that's 652. These are 100 to 206 years too early. So they all predate. These fragments all predate not only Islam, but they predate Muhammad and the Quran. In 2015, Birmingham University came out with what they call the Birmingham Quran. This is the first Quran, their oldest Quran, because carbon dating at the Oxford lab, the same one that they did the Sana'a manuscript, dated it from 568 to 645. Muhammad was born in 570, died in 632. So this covers the lifespan of Muhammad, proving they said that this is the oldest Quran. Dr. David Thomas, who is a curator for that Library, said the writer of this manuscript could well have known the Prophet Muhammad. He would have seen him probably. He would maybe have even heard him preach. He may have known him personally. And that really is quite a thought to conjure. But here's the problem, folks. It's only 2 pages. It's just 33 verses. They're from 3 different surahs, Surah 18, 19, and 20. 33 verses out of 343 verses, that's just 10%. This is not a full manuscript. What's more, out of 6,236 verses in the Quran, that's a very minuscule part of the Quran. What's interesting is look at those 33 verses. Chapter 18, verse 17 to 31 is about the 7 sleepers of Ephesus. That's a story that was recreated by the Bishop Jacob of Sarug in 512 AD. In chapter 19, the story there is from Proto-Evangelium of James from 145 AD, then was repeated in the pseudo-gospel of Matthew in 600 AD. Surah 20, verse 1 to 40 is the story of Moses, straight out of the Bible from 1400 BC, which means all of these 3 stories have nothing to do with Islam. They predate Islam. They predate Muhammad. They predate the Quran. Can you see that these are stories that already exist? These are Christian apocryphal writings and Jewish apocryphal writings, and then part of the Bible itself that were then borrowed. They were already written in Arabic. Of course, they were written in Arabic because they were Arab Jews and Arab Christians, and then incorporated into the Quran in chapter 18, 19, and 20. I won't go into all the conclusions there. You can read them for yourself. I want to go into the 4,000 early manuscript variants, the work that is done by Dr. Brubaker. There's his book, go buy it. And he found 4 types of variants: insertions. He also found erasers. He also found erasers overwritten, and he found overwriting without erasers and selective coverings. 4,000 of these he has been able to find throughout the Quran. Selective coverings overwritten, tapings. When you look at that, you can see, folks, that this completely shuts down any notion the Quran has not been changed. 4,000 consonantal variants proves that the Quran has been changed wholesale. When Muslims try to come up in 2019 with a full Quran, when we asked them to do that, 2019, that's just 4 years ago, they came up and they said that there is that unlike the Bible, they said in this is a debate I'm having with Mansur Uthman, probably the world authority on the manuscripts on the right there at Speaker's Corner. In June of 2019, we had this debate, and he claimed that they have all the manuscript. They can get the entire Quran all the way back to Uthman. I said, where is it? He said, well, we have 97% of it. What did he mean, 97? If you look at his website, he's talking about this. He's talking about 63 fragments that make up 97%. 20 of them that I'm putting up there right now that he's looked at, and I've got them, and we've looked at them. These ones are tentatively dated. There's disagreement between scholars. There's no conclusion on any of those 20. He should not have used those. 9 of them, and including the one that's half the Quran that they need 50% from, are all dated after 719. He should not have used any of those 9. And 34 of them, in other words, half of them, we have no way of knowing because no one's done any work on them. So why did he even use them? It's obvious he needed them to make up 97%. He just grabbed them thinking that no one would check up on him. We checked up on him, and we shut that down in so quick face. That's why be careful what you say in public. We'll take it to pieces if it is not authoritative. So let me just go ahead and talk about when the Hafs text came into being. The Hafs text that we use today was actually chosen by Muhammad Ali al-Husseini al-Haddad 99 years ago in 1924, just for the city of Cairo. That then was chosen for all of Egypt in 1936, 87 years ago, as the Farouk edition, because that was so successful. And here's Hafs. This is the ones that Hatu now has. In 1985 in Saudi Arabia, they then chose the Hafs as the world edition for the whole world. That's 38 years ago, folks. Now, I'm going to end with this. This is probably the most devastating material, and this is most exciting. When you look at the Quran, remember I talked about all the dots. This man here, Dr. Gunther Lulling, in 1970, decided to take the dots off this beautiful poetry and replace it with Aramaic dots. When he did that, by putting Aramaic dots onto from the Arabic text, he was able to go back and find that this beautiful poetry in the Quran comes from Christian hymns written in Aramaic by Christians. He got the highest grade you could get, excellent opus, there in Germany, and he was thrown out of university and into obscurity. We translated his text into English, which brought him out of obscurity, so he died a happy man in 2014. Christoph Guterluning did, and decided to look at the 25% of the Quran that one understands. A quarter of the Quran, even the scholars don't understand. And he took the dots off and replaced it with some Aramaic dots. He did 7 different layers of process. You can look at them all there. I won't go into them. By replacing all the dots with Aramaic dots, this is what he found. All this 26% of the Quran was then unpacked. And he found that these dark passages were Christian lectionaries, Christian homilies, and Christian hymns, all about Jesus Christ. If you take off the dots out of the Arabic and replace it with the Aramaic dots from where these were lifted from, you go back to Jesus. It's not what they found, it's who they found. The conclusion is, when you look at the manuscripts, you notice that the Aramaic texts were first from Aramaic. They were then translated into Arabic in the 7th century, but they didn't have dots and vowels. That's why when you look at the Arabic manuscripts from the 8th and 9th century, there are no dots and vowels. Once you put dots and vowels on between the 8th and 10th century, that's where you get the many different Qurans. There has been a manipulation, a change all the way through. And I will stop there because I see I've gone over my time. I'm sure there might be some questions for you, Peter. Over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Jay. And that was a huge amount of stuff, of course, in a very short period of time. And we have used up our full hour, sadly, already. For those who've been listening, the full PowerPoint will be available in a PDF format so that you'll have time to look at that too. And we'll also, when we write to you, give you references to fuller versions of this presentation on the web that Jay Smith has done before in other contexts, so that you can go back and look at it at your leisure. I just wanted to ask you one question, really, in closing, because we've pretty much run out of time. And I was really struck by your comment about the difference between modern day scholars who all claim that the Quran hasn't been changed in 1400 years and claim that the Hafs version is the original one that Uthman authorized and sent out to the 5 centers. The difference between them and the scholars and writers of the Hadith, compilers of the Hadith back in the 9th and 10th century, who seem to acknowledge that there were all sorts of variations and changes. Now, of course, these people in the 9th and 10th century were still committed Muslims. And I guess my question is, does it really matter for Muslims if there have been changes? Or because if we look at the Bible itself, the New Testament documents, there are a lot of variations between the different manuscripts that we look at. And it doesn't bother us because we can get back to the original text, and because the theology of the New Testament is not threatened by any of these copying errors. So for Muslims, does it really matter? Or is the Quran and its theology consistent enough that it still provides a good foundation for the faith if they can let go of this idea that it hasn't been changed?
Great question. Let me answer it real quickly. Here's the problem. It doesn't matter for 99% of Muslims who are not scholars. And for those, it matters absolutely for 99% of Muslims who are not scholars. The Muslims who are not scholars, this is sacrosanct. You do not touch the Quran. Why? Because that's the one thing they have to go on. Remember, unlike Christianity, where you can sit there and you can criticize the Bible, you can eradicate its authority and its historicity, we still have a relationship with Jesus Christ, all of us. That's what we go on. We're not dependent on a Bible to either take or give or take away from Jesus Christ. Islam doesn't have that. There is no relationship. All they have is one book that supposedly came from one man, that supposedly came from in a 22-year period in one place. If that is the case, then you can see why they have to hold on to the Quran as eternal and as something that has not come from man. It has to be above it, because that's the only thing they have on to go on. Secondly, and this is probably much more devastating for the scholars and others, the Quran itself makes that claim that it is eternal. The Quran itself makes that claim that it came to Muhammad. The Quran itself makes that claim that God will provide it, protect it from ever being changed or manipulated or corrupted. So if that is the Quran making that claim, then even the scholars have to give lip service to that. That's why it either way. Now, here's what's interesting. This is their primary revelation. There is nothing outside the Quran that really is their primary revelation to who God is, who they are, and what they're to do, how they're to walk, talk, eat, and drink. We don't go to the Bible as our primary revelation. It's secondary. It's much like their hadith, their sirah, their tafsir, and their tahqiq. The hadith and the sirah would be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The tafsir would be Paul's letters, and the hadith would be the book of Acts. So the same genre would be like their traditions. So where's our primary revelation? Our primary revelation is not the Bible. Our primary revelation is Jesus himself. So when you look and you ask those 4 questions, remember the 4 questions that are applied to the Quran, that it's eternal, sent down, complete, and unchanged. Apply those 4 questions. We've eradicated them for Islam. Let's apply them to Jesus Christ. Is Jesus eternal? Yes, he is. Was Jesus sent down? Yes, he was. Is he complete? Absolutely. Has he never changed? He has never changed. The very 4 things that every Muslim desires and must have for their primary revelation, the Quran, we have in Jesus Christ. So by eradicating those 4 criteria for the Quran, we bring them home to Jesus Christ. What better revelation than the Logos, the Word of God, who came to earth and died for every Muslim? Let's make sure we bring that into the discussion, because that is where we bring them home.
Thank you very much, Jay. We have run out of time, sadly. That concludes a series of 4 talks on understanding Islam by Dr. Jay Smith. And if you haven't seen the other 3, then I really recommend that you do. They're all available on our website, so do pass the word on to others. Finally, this falls to me, Jay, to say thanks so much again for coming along and joining us, for the material you've presented, and most of all for the work that you're doing, and for making it so accessible to others, this latest research. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. Do spread the word, and do pass it on, and make use of these resources as we make them available to you. So may the Lord bless you, and we'll see you again soon on ICMDA webinars. Thank you.